Feel the earth pulse beneath your boots. The warm African sun grazes your skin. In the distance, an elephant's trumpet rolls across open woodland, echoing through groves of umbrella-shaped acacias. Fresh paw prints press into pale dust ahead of you. Lion, perhaps leopard, and the thrill of the unknown sharpens every sense. This is Zambia, a vast, landlocked nation in South-Central Africa, spanning approximately 752,618 square kilometers. It is a country defined not by skylines, but by wilderness. Nearly 30% of its land area falls under some form of protected status, creating one of the largest conservation networks on the continent. Here, safari is not spectacle, it is immersion. At the heart of this wild expanse lies South Luangwa National Park, covering about 9,050 square kilometers of intact riverine forest, mopane woodland, and open plains. The Luangwa River, lifeblood of the ecosystem, carves oxbow lagoons and seasonal floodplains that draw extraordinary concentrations of wildlife. More than 60 mammal species roam these habitats, including endemic subspecies such as the Thornicroft's giraffe and Cookson's wildebeest, alongside over 400 recorded bird species, from carmine bee-eaters to African fish eagles. Often described as the real Africa, Zambia has cultivated a reputation for low-density, high-authenticity safaris. Visitor numbers remain significantly lower than in more commercialized destinations such as Kenya's Masai Mara or South Africa's Kruger National Park. The result is a rarer commodity in modern travel: silence, scale, and solitude. Since 2020, Zambia's tourism sector has demonstrated strong recovery momentum, with international arrivals rebounding sharply as global travel resumed. Investment in conservation-led tourism, community partnerships, and premium eco-lodges has positioned the country as one of Africa's fastest-rising safari destinations. Walking safaris, pioneered in South Luangwa in the 1950s, remain a defining experience, allowing visitors to track wildlife on foot under the guidance of highly trained scouts and naturalists. This is not safari from behind glass. It is dust on your boots, the scent of wild sage crushed underfoot, the primal awareness of sharing space with predators. Zambia does not overwhelm with spectacle. It reveals itself slowly, through river mist at dawn, through the watchful stillness of a leopard in winter thorn branches, through the long golden hush of sunset over the Luangwa Valley. Here, wilderness is not curated, it is lived. At Zambia's wild core lies an innovation that reshaped African safari, the walking safari. In the early 1950s, conservationist Norman Carr pioneered the concept in the Luangwa Valley, replacing the detached perspective of vehicle-based game drives with something far more elemental: tracking wildlife on foot. His philosophy was radical for its time, that true conservation begins with intimacy, and intimacy begins at ground level. On foot, scale changes. Distance collapses. The bush is no longer a panorama framed by a windshield. It is texture, scent, sound, and tension. Every snapped twig carries meaning. Every shift in wind direction matters. You begin to read the landscape the way wildlife does, as a living system of signals. In this journey, we move alongside Zambia's professional guides and scouts, among the most rigorously trained in Africa. The Zambia Professional Hunters and Guides Association, ZPHGA, certification process is widely regarded as one of the continent's most demanding, requiring deep ecological knowledge, tracking expertise, firearm competence, and crisis judgment. Many guides descend from families rooted in the Luangwa Valley, their bushcraft refined over generations. They interpret spoor-like script, the freshness of a leopard's pug mark, the drag mark of a crocodile returning to water. the subtle imprint of elephant pads pressed into river, sand hours before. South Luangwa provides the ideal stage. Elephants move in matriarchal lines through winter thorn forests. Leopards, for which the park is globally renowned, drape themselves over sausage tree branches in daylight heat. Along the Luangwa River, one of Africa's most hippo-dense waterways, pods jostle and bellow while Nile crocodiles patrol the margins with prehistoric stillness. Walking safaris here are not reckless immersion, they are disciplined choreography. Small groups move in single file. A lead scout reads terrain and wind. A backup scout monitors the rear. Encounters unfold at respectful distances, governed by animal behavior and ethical codes developed over decades. The objective is not adrenaline, it is awareness. What makes Zambia singular is its restraint. Camps remain low density. Concessions are vast. There are stretches of valley where you may walk for hours without seeing another vehicle. The result is a safari experience that feels unscripted and profoundly unsaturated. From the historical arc of Norman Carr's conservation model, which linked wildlife protection to community benefit, to present-day eco-camps that fund anti-poaching and local employment, Zambia's safari industry remains deeply intertwined with stewardship. This is a story written in spoor and river dust, in the hush before rounding a bend, in the electric stillness of standing downwind of a bull elephant. Zambia does not promise spectacle on demand. It offers proximity earned through patience. The trail is before you. Step lightly. Zambia's modern safari identity is inseparable from South Luangwa National Park, widely regarded as the cradle of the walking safari. Proclaimed a game reserve in 1950 and elevated to national park status in 1972, South Luangwa spans approximately 9,050 square kilometers along the Luangwa River in eastern Zambia. The river itself, stretching roughly 800 kilometers through the valley, functions as the park's ecological artery, carving oxbow lagoons, sustaining floodplains, and concentrating wildlife during the dry season. Landscape and ecological structure. South Luangwa sits within the Greater Luangwa Valley ecosystem, part of the East African Rift system. Its habitat mosaic is unusually dynamic. Riverine forests dominated by winterthorn, Phaidherbia albida, sausage trees, and mahogany. Oxbow lagoons and seasonal wetlands formed by shifting river channels. Mopane woodlands adapted to alkaline soils and heat extremes. Open grass plains that expand after annual floods. The Luangwa's seasonal flood pulse drives wildlife distribution. During the dry months, May to October, water scarcity funnels animals toward the river corridor, producing some of Africa's highest observable game densities. Wildlife density and notable populations. South Luangwa supports one of the continent's most concentrated assemblages of large mammals. Elephants, approximately 10,000 individuals in Puis, the broader valley ecosystem. Leopards, often cited among Africa's strongest leopard densities, with estimates near 1,000 in the greater region. Lions, approximately 400 within the ecosystem. Buffalo, large herds frequently exceeding 800 to 1,000 animals. Endemics, Thornicroft's giraffe and Cookson's wildebeest, subspecies found only in the Luangwa Valley. The park also hosts over 400 bird species, including carmine bee-eaters that nest in dramatic riverbank colonies. Controlled access and low visitor density. South Luangwa remains deliberately low volume compared to East Africa's mass tourism parks. Annual visitation typically hovers around 30,000 to 40,000 guests, a fraction of the numbers seen in the Serengeti or Masai Mara. Access is primarily via Mfue Airport, MFU, gateway to the park. Charter or scheduled flights from Lusaka, approximately 1 hour. Seasonal road transfers during the dry season. The limited infrastructure and dispersed camps minimize congestion. Even in peak months, it is common to conduct full game drives or multi-hour walks without encountering other vehicles, a rarity in more commercialized safari circuits. Conservation model South Luangwa's conservation framework traces back to Norman Carr's community-based philosophy, which linked wildlife protection to local economic participation. Contemporary operators continue this model through anti-poaching funding, employment of local scouts, and collaboration with organizations such as Conservation South Luangwa. South Luangwa is not defined by spectacle density alone. Its distinction lies in ecological integrity, predator visibility, and a safari structure built on restraint rather than volume. Here, the river dictates movement. The floodplain shapes survival, and the wilderness remains convincingly, deliberately wild. The transformation of Zambia's safari industry from passive observation to immersive participation began with Norman Carr, a British game ranger who arrived in the Luangwa Valley in the early 1930s. Initially tasked with wildlife control and regulation, Carr grew increasingly disillusioned with the prevailing model of colonial-era safaris, trophy hunting, and later vehicle-based wildlife viewing that distanced visitors from ecological reality. By the late 1940s, Carr had formulated a radically different idea, one rooted in conservation through experience rather than extraction, the birth of the walking safari. In 1950, Carr founded Nsefu Camp on a bend of the Luangwa River, widely recognized as one of Africa's first photographic safari camps. More importantly, he introduced a structured system of guided walking safaris, shifting the paradigm from mechanical game drives to on-foot immersion. His philosophy was deceptively simple. To walk in the bush is to be part of the bush. Walking changed everything. The sensory hierarchy reversed. Scent, sound, and wind direction became critical. Wildlife encounters required discipline, positioning, and reading subtle behavioral cues. Guests were no longer observers passing through, but temporary participants within the ecosystem. This was not reckless proximity. Carr's model emphasized distance management, animal behavior interpretation, and strict safety protocols, foundations that still define Zambia's walking safaris today. Professionalization of the Zambian guide. Carr also understood that walking demanded elite training. Over decades, Zambia developed one of Africa's most rigorous guiding standards. Modern Zambian professional guides undergo approximately 1,500 plus hours of field-based apprenticeship, intensive written and practical examinations, ballistics and firearm safety certification, first aid and wilderness emergency response training, identification proficiency including O400 plus bird species, often by call alone, O60 plus mammal tracks and spoor, interpretation of insect behavior, botany, and ecological systems. The final qualification, often referred to as the Zambia Professional Guide License, is widely regarded as among the continent's toughest certifications. Why walking matters. Ecologically, walking safaris reshape human-wildlife dynamics in measurable ways. Vehicles create predictable mechanical disturbance. Walkers create minimal acoustic footprint. Animals respond differently to humans on foot, often with curiosity or cautious assessment rather than flight. Tracking spoor teaches ecological sequencing: who passed, when, in what condition, and why. Guests learn to interpret crushed grass patterns, dung moisture gradients, alarm calls from fork-tailed drongos or vervet monkeys, subtle shifts in wind. It becomes a lesson in pattern recognition and environmental literacy, not spectacle chasing. Enduring legacy. Today, South Luangwa remains the global benchmark for walking safaris, the Pukukim. Operational DNA, small groups, armed scout presence, slow pace, interpretive depth, traces directly back to Carr's mid-20th century innovation. His legacy is not just a tourism model, it is a conservation ethic. Engagement fosters empathy, empathy fosters protection. In Zambia's Luangwa Valley, that equation still holds. Our trail cuts north from the settled edges near Mfue, where the tar road dissolves into dust and the Luangwa River begins to dictate time itself. Here, multi-day walking safaris unfold as they were meant to, slow, deliberate, and unscripted. For 3 to 7 days, small groups, typically no more than 4 to 6 guests, move on foot through some of Africa's most intact wilderness. Each day covers 10 to 15 kilometers, paced not by itinerary, but by spoor, wind, and water. Nights are spent in fly camps or lightweight mobile tents, minimalist canvas shelters beneath winter thorn trees, open to the sounds of hyenas whooping and hippos grazing, just beyond the lantern's glow. Operators such as Remote Africa Safaris and Robin Pope Safaris, custodians of Norman Carr's legacy, structure classic routes beginning at Nkwali Camp. From there, the walk follows the sinuous course of the Mupamadzi River, a vital tributary feeding the Luangwa system. This corridor is a wildlife artery, leopard territory etched into riverine forests, lion prides patrolling sandy banks, elephants filtering through mopane woodland in near silence despite their size. Tracking. Reading the unwritten story. On foot, the bush becomes text. A lion's spoor, roughly 12 centimeters across, the heel pad marked by 3 lobes at the base, tells more than species. Depth indicates weight. Crisp edges suggest freshness. Drag marks hint at a recent kill. Elephant dung, formed into fibrous boluses, becomes a timestamp. Moisture levels and insect activity can narrow passage time to within hours. Fiber content reveals diet: mopane leaf, winter thorn pod, riverine grass. This is not folklore, it is applied ecology. Guides, many from the Kunda community, indigenous to the Luangwa Valley, interpret bent stems, alarm calls, and scent trails with astonishing fluency. A fork-tailed drongo's agitation may betray a stalking leopard. The sudden silence of baboons in the canopy can signal a lion's approach. Behavior prediction is constant. Wind direction determines approach angle. Elephant ear position signals mood, relaxed pendulum swing versus rigid, forward spread. Buffalo herd formation reveals alertness or agitation. Every step is negotiated with the landscape. Camp, the night ecology. At dusk, fly camps emerge as lantern-lit islands in the dark. No generators, no fences. The Luangwa ecosystem continues, uninterrupted. You hear lions contact calling across territories, hippos leaving the river in single-file processions, the dry crack of branches under unseen weight. Research across African wilderness areas consistently shows that such low-impact, small-group walking models minimize ecological disturbance while deepening visitor comprehension of ecosystem interdependence. And comprehension is the currency here. The psychological shift. After several days on foot, something subtle recalibrates. Distance compresses, sound sharpens, attention stabilizes. You begin to understand why Zambia is often described as offering real Africa. It is not about exclusivity, it is about scale and intimacy. A national park of 9,050 square kilometers, yet only around 30,000 visitors annually, compared to several 100,000 in East Africa's most famous reserves. Here, you are not one vehicle among 20. You are a moving presence within an ancient system that does not pause for you, but allows you passage. And when you finally encounter elephants at close but respectful range, their low rumbles vibrating through the ground before you ever see them, you understand Norman, Carr's insight completely. To walk in the bush is not to conquer it, it is to negotiate with it. The Luangwa does not offer spectacle on demand, it offers participation, and that is infinitely more powerful. Mornings in the Luangwa Valley begin before first light. A kettle hisses over coals. Coffee is poured into enamel mugs as the horizon shifts from indigo to pale gold. By 6 o'clock, you are moving, 4 unhurried hours on foot, while the air is still cool and predators are returning from the night's hunt. Giraffes browse acacia thorn with deliberate grace, their prehensile tongues navigating spines effortlessly. Spotted hyenas loiter near the remains of a kill, their powerful jaws capable of crushing femurs that lions leave behind. On foot, these are not distant silhouettes framed by a vehicle window. They are presences measured by wind direction, posture, and distance. Midday belongs to shade. Temperatures in the dry season routinely exceed 35 degrees Celsius, and activity slows. Afternoons are for rest beneath winterthorn trees, field discussions about tracks collected that morning, and the quiet observation of river life. Bee-eaters hawking insects, elephants crossing channels with calves tucked between adults. By evening, the campfire becomes a forum. Stories circulate. Close encounters, tracking puzzles solved, near misses turned lessons. The bush settles into nocturnal rhythm. Wildlife at ground level, encounters on foot, recalibrate scale and emotion. Buffalo herds, sometimes several hundred strong, stand in tight defensive formation. You read ear flicks, head lifts, and scent-testing snorts. Distance is negotiated carefully. Wind is everything. Leopard tracking often begins with drag marks, a faint furrow in sand leading toward riverine thicket, sometimes ending beneath a sausage tree where an impala carcass hangs out of hyena reach. Hippos dominate oxbow lagoons. A wide yawn is not fatigue, but a territorial display, revealing canines exceeding 30 centimeters. South Luangwa supports extraordinary avian density, over 450 recorded bird species. Carmine bee-eaters excavate nesting tunnels in sandy riverbanks each dry season, forming vivid colonies. Lilac-breasted rollers flash electric blue and violet in short aerial sallies. Crowned cranes, saddle-billed storks, and Pell's fishing owls occupy distinct ecological niches along the floodplain. Night walks, conducted with strict protocol, reveal small nocturnal specialists, genets navigating branches with feline precision, spring hares bounding in exaggerated arcs, aardvarks excavating termite mounds with formidable claws, safety and protocol. Walking safaris operate under tightly regulated Zambian Wildlife Authority standards. Groups move single file, guide in front, armed scout at rear. Commands are concise and non-negotiable. Stop. Back slowly. Freeze. Distances are conservative, particularly with elephant bulls and buffalo. Guides carry large-caliber rifles strictly as a last resort deterrent. The discipline is deliberate. On foot, you are part of the ecological equation, not insulated from it. Beyond South Luangwa National Park, 22,400 square kilometers. One of Africa's largest protected areas, Kafue dwarfs many European countries in scale. The Busanga Plains, seasonally flooded, attract red lechwe, puku antelope, and predators, including cheetah and African wild dog. Visitor numbers remain low, roughly 10,000 annually, creating immense spatial solitude. Walking routes here often follow floodplain margins where tracks remain legible in damp substrate. Lower Zambezi National Park, set along the Zambezi River opposite Zimbabwe's Mana pools, this park allows canoe and walk combinations. Mornings may begin paddling past crocodiles and elephant herds drinking at the Ititi's bank, followed by disembarking for guided foot tracking in winterthorn forest. The interplay of riverine and terrestrial ecosystems creates unusually dynamic wildlife movement patterns. The human element. Zambia's guides. If landscape is the stage, guides are the interpreters. Veterans such as Boyd Banda of South Luangwa, with decades in the field, embody Zambia's guiding tradition. Many belong to local communities such as the Bemba or Kunda, and their knowledge integrates ecological literacy with inherited cultural narratives. They identify over 200 plant species used traditionally for medicine, nutrition, or construction. Subtle alarm calls distinguishing leopard from lion presence. Micro-habitat variations that determine where wild dogs may den. In Bemba cosmology, elephants are often described as wise elders, patient, memory keepers of the land. Lions symbolize authority and territorial sovereignty. These frameworks do not replace science. They coexist with it, adding interpretive depth to field observation. Why Zambia feels different. Zambia's safari model is defined by low tourist density, high guide qualification standards, emphasis on walking over vehicle dominance, minimal infrastructure footprint in key areas. The result is immersion rather than spectacle. There are no traffic jams around sightings, no radio chatter directing convoys, just spoor in sand, wind in grass, and the slow recalibration of your senses to an ecosystem operating on its own terms. In Zambia, you do not simply view wildlife. You enter its terrain, cautiously, respectfully, and fully awake. The trail does not promise certainty. It promises authenticity. Intimacy defines Zambia's wilderness in ways statistics alone never can. Around the fire, guides speak quietly of moments when instinct outweighed training, of elephant matriarchs issuing mock charges across dry riverbeds, forcing scouts and guests to step behind towering termite mounds for elevation and visibility. Those mounds, some rising over 3 meters high, are more than geological curiosities. They are strategic vantage points in a landscape where sightlines mean safety. Veteran guides describe teaching their own children to read the bush long before they can read books. How fresh lion tracks show crisp pad edges before wind softens them. How oxpeckers lifting suddenly from a buffalo herd signal agitation. How the pitch of a vervet monkey's alarm call distinguishes leopard from eagle. This transmission of knowledge is not romantic nostalgia. It is cultural continuity in a nation modernizing rapidly, where urban migration competes with ancestral livelihoods. Conservation at the core. Zambia's walking safari model is inseparable from conservation economics. South Luangwa National Park employs roughly 100 wildlife rangers, funded in part through park fees and tourism levies. These teams conduct anti-poaching patrols targeting illegal ivory and bushmeat networks. According to data from the Zambian Department of National Parks and Wildlife and conservation partners such as Conservation South Luangwa, sustained patrol presence and community engagement have significantly reduced elephant poaching compared to peak crisis years in the early 2000s. Equally critical are community resource boards and local conservancies operating in game management areas surrounding parks. Revenue-sharing mechanisms channel tourism income into school construction, rural health clinics, boreholes for clean water, alternative livelihood programs. In some chiefdom areas adjacent to South Luangwa, collaborative conservation models have contributed to dramatic reductions in snaring and illegal hunting. In certain zones, reporting declines approaching 60 to 70% over the past decade as employment alternatives expanded. Here, conservation is not abstract policy. It is payroll, infrastructure, and local ownership, the psychology of vulnerability. On foot, hierarchy dissolves. You are no longer elevated in a metal frame with an engine idling beneath you. You move at 4 kilometers per hour, the speed of the ecosystem itself. Wind direction dictates your approach. Bird alarms become intelligence briefings. Every rustle commands attention. Neurologically, this state heightens sensory processing. Studies on immersive nature exposure suggest measurable reductions in cortisol levels and improved attentional restoration. But walking safaris add another layer: calibrated risk. The awareness that you occupy shared terrain sharpens perception into something close to primal clarity. It is not reckless. It is regulated, disciplined exposure to wild systems. And that vulnerability is precisely the appeal. Zambia's rising trajectory. Zambia's tourism sector has accelerated strongly in the post-pandemic recovery phase. Government tourism reports indicate sustained year-on-year growth since 2021, with international arrivals rebounding sharply as long-haul adventure markets reopened. By 2025, projections suggest continued double-digit growth, supported by expanded regional flight routes and visa facilitation for key markets. Luxury bush camps such as Chinzombo, operated by Time Plus Tide, blend high-end design with Norman Carr's original walking ethos, offering guided walks alongside vehicle safaris while maintaining low guest density and conservation funding commitments. Yet Zambia's competitive edge remains consistent. Low visitor concentration, large unfenced ecosystems, strong guide certification standards, emphasis on walking as primary interpretation. Why it endures. In Zambia, safari is not spectacle, it is participation. You learn to slow down, to notice dung texture and wind shifts, to measure silence. The Luangwa River still curves through 800 kilometers of valley floor. Elephants still cross at dusk, leopards still hunt by moonlight, and guides, patient, precise, deeply local, continue to translate the bush in real time. As Zambia's wild calls soften into memory, one truth remains. In its raw tracks lies Africa's enduring pulse. Walk lightly, track deeply, let the bush recalibrate your senses. Thank you for stepping into Zambia's wilderness. Subscribe for the next expedition. Until then, follow the footprints.